Hey guys, my name is LocoDoco, the better looking host of Listen Loco, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
Global meta thinking is a term which encompasses the paradigm that there is a global meta that just applies to the game League of Legends, and it doesn't matter what region you play in, what level you play at. This is essentially the most correct way to play. This is the most advanced model, the most effective play. So that can break down across all areas of playing the game of League of Legends. Could be stylistically how a team or a specific lane chooses to play. The most famous one obviously would be Season 5 to Season 7 of the controlled vision control macro style of play, which was famously dubbed the Korean style because often SK Telecom engaged in this, and to some degree Rox Tigers. There's pick-wise, obviously there's a global meta. Famous examples, early Season 3, you had Kassadin was 100% pick ban in pretty much all the major regions. More recently, at the beginning of the summer split now for Season 9, you had Yuumi, the new support champion, was pretty much pick ban the whole time, was winning most of the times it was ever picked. Comp-wise, in terms of the overall team comp you pick, go back to Season 3, you had the rise of the pick comp with teams like SK Telecom, KT Rolster Bullets. You in Season 5 had the GE Tigers, later the Rox Tigers, with the famous Juggermore, with Lulu and Kog'Maw. The key here, and the essential part of this global meta thinking, which the video itself isn't as much about, it's about ignoring that actually, is the notion that because it works anywhere and it's just about what's most effective in League of Legends at the moment, it'll work in your region as well, wherever that might be. You basically treat champions just as if they're champions, not based on who's piloting them, as LS would say. You treat comps as if they're just comps, not based on the player strength and personnel of the opposing team or your team. Now, you can have a whole separate discussion, I'll do it in a video sometime, about that entire concept, that very paradigm, the flaws, the pros, the cons, how it developed, when it should be avoided. I mean, obvious example, I'll give you a little spoiler, is I personally think if Faker's piloting a champion, you shouldn't treat that as though that was Golden Glue piloting the same champion, because you'll have a bad time in some of those games if you think your comp can just beat that or just beat that champion, but you forget it's Faker and not a much worse player. But what I want to talk about in this video is how that kind of thinking naturally applies to players in different regions, and how when you are someone who chooses, actively chooses, I'm not going to buy into this global meta. I don't agree with it. I don't want to play those champions. And you go your own path, and you either have one-off picks, or you have a pick you continually go to, a comfort champion, something you've brought into the meta perhaps. And other people don't agree with you. They don't pick it up and play it, or if they play it themselves, it's just occasionally. I want to talk about that angle, the people who choose to ignore it. Because by default, if we assume the initial premise, which is that a lot of people, a lot of coaches, I can tell you, and analysts buy into this global meta thinking, then by default, it probably is, add up the plus and the minus. It's probably overall the best way to play League of Legends. It's basically a collective group think approach for the entire world, coming up with different solutions and counters, and that's how you establish this set of champions and comps and styles which work the best now. Generally, yeah, it's going to make sense to buy into this, to study this, to at least understand it for what your opponent's going to do and possibly for what you can do. But sometimes I do think players can eschew that whole approach and that paradigm. But I think, as you would expect, there can be good and bad approaches to doing so. And so the two players I want to talk about in this video, because there's obviously been a lot of famous examples. The two I want to talk about in this video, who are an example of a good and a bad, the good is PowerofEvil, now of CLG, and the bad is Keane, most recently of FlyQuest. Because this whole paradigm of the global meta has this general trend that suggests you are either a weaker player or you've got poor decision making and you're just not good enough if you refuse to just go into the hard pick best champions in the global meta. So historically, some of the greatest players the West's ever produced have done this. So obviously Froggen famously has tended wherever possible to not play assassins. Another of one of my favorites, Forgiven, the AD carry, obviously had times where Kalista and Sivir were very strong and he just refused to play them for seasons at a time seemingly. And they were rightly or unfairly, depending on which specific case you're talking about, criticised for being the best players, but not being willing to buy into the global meta of what everyone else had found was strongest. So using these two examples, the bad one, as I mentioned, is Keane. Now, he's a player, you may remember, he was the mid laner of Gravity, and then more recently he was in FlyQuest and got subbed in a little bit. The other player I picked out, obviously being PowerofEvil, famously of Unicorns of Love, and then was at Worlds with Misfits and played in Optic in NA last year, now plays in CLG, who's actually one of the top teams in the summer split at this point in time. Here's the difference. When Keane had his sometimes really weird off-meta picks. Like, famously, he played like Urgot, Jarvan mid lane, Rumble mid lane, Malphite mid lane. These are Season 5 summer picks. This guy's playing the mid lane against the likes of a Jensen, Bjergsen, some of the best players in the entire West in theory. Now, here's the thing. He would get wins from some of these picks, and sometimes it would look good. But the key distinction, and I happen to know some of the people who were teammates of his and former coaches of his, and I've read a lot of interviews, is his approach wasn't that these were the champions he was the best at and he understood the best. It's that these tended to be where he would find a weird, sometimes very specific matchup. Like, if this guy picks X, I will pick Urgot into it. If this guy picks Y, I will play Jarvan mid lane, even though it's not a mid lane champion. So he would be about finding a weird matchup or an unusual counter pick that they couldn't expect. And the notion, the entire mechanism he was relying upon is that the opponent won't know his pick or this specific matchup or expect that counter pick, and therefore the comp to go the way it's going to go. And therefore the opponent won't either be competent or comfortable enough on his pick in the other side of the matchup, or the opposing team won't be competent or comfortable against the pick that Keane's done or what it makes his team's comp overall. So generally, these picks only really worked as a one-off, a weird cheese, an approach to force an opponent to react later on in a pick ban or in the next game to potentially ban it if it had strength, or have to try and pick it themselves and play it if they thought it was some weird, like, sleeper OP side of a matchup. The flaw here is that Keane just had the pick for those set circumstances. Not that he himself was a god with that pick, or he himself was even super comfortable with it, or understood something special about how to play it that other people didn't. He understood some basics of it because it didn't normally exist, but he needed himself some very gimmicky elements and some very specific parts to work out for the pick to even be viable. Otherwise, it would be much worse than a standard global meta pick that he may be able to play at like a 7 out of 10, 6 out of 10 level. Now, I happen to know that this is the fact because I've heard from some of the people who coached him and teammates of his that he was very picky about what champion he was given in the game. And sometimes he would say, oh, I don't want to play champion X because champion Y counters it in the matchup. And then the coach would say, I could get you champion Y against champion X then, the other side, the winning side of the matchup. And he would say, I can't play that side either. So I can only play the champion X if it's not against champion Y. And if we have an option on champion Y but it'll be against champion X, I can't play that side actually. So you could see he had some issues in that respect. So his approach, very gimmicky, it won't work in the long run or with much sustained success. Quite frankly, should just be categorized as cheese or one-offs. So you know what, it has its place, but it's not a real style. You can't do this very often. It's not a true strength as a player. It's only occasionally even going to help you out, and as I say, as one-offs. It's really just an occasional, conditional opportunity. Every now and then you're going to get this opportunity, you could exploit, you could get one win here and there. That can have its value, but it's not going to make you a top player, and it doesn't justify doing this a lot. I would actually say Keane sometimes did it too much and made it too gimmicky. Then you go and look at Power of Evil, and even though he's also picking off meta champions or champions that haven't been used for years, his way of doing it very different actually. Because Power of Evil had some champions he'd played a lot in his career. He had Orianna, most famously, Syndra, more recently Victor, Cassiopeia. And these champions, as opposed to those one-off conditional picks that Keane was doing, Power of Evil has shown over his career, he will basically play the champions I've just named practically any time he deems them viable or available in the meta. Not in the global meta, in his version of the meta. So they can be completely out the meta or occasional one-off picks for someone else, and he might still pick it 4 or 5 times in a split. So it's not that he was doing weird one-offs or cheeses. Also, he wouldn't just pick it because it's the champion in the matchup. He would also pick it to have a unique build. He would have a build path someone else hadn't taken. So even when it was played by others, the reason why he thought it wasn't effective or efficient is because they weren't using his build path. And because he's played this champion and he knows them in and out and all the matchups, he played them for year on year on year on year in different metas, he's a guy who has a sense of where he wants to go with his build and what his specific power spikes are going to be in the game, how he's going to play the game out in terms of his comp, and where he's going to have his chances against this specific opponent. Things that other people can't always do. So he would play these picks, but with different builds. Famous examples being, if you go all the way back to Season 5, there was the famous Nashor's Tooth build on Orianna that could do like 2,000 damage extra or something mad over a game. He brought that out again in Season 7 when everyone said it wasn't good anymore, in a game against Flash Wolves at Worlds. Now, his concept for this, what made it different, this build, than what other people would do with it, the other build, was His concept was, I want to have extra health and I want to have extra sustained attack damage from auto attacks. That's his concept. That's how he was going to play around it. You look at some of the other things he's done. He's invented some builds that made champions viable that other people then immediately copied. Like an obvious example would be in, I think it was Season 5 Summer, he started playing Varus as a mid laner. This is way, way before the people had done this. And he would use it, I think it is even a tier build. Now, at the time, people were even thinking, is this just trolling? But you know what? When it worked, all of a sudden, Faker was copying it over in Korea and SK Telecom. NukeDuck was copying it on Roccat in Europe. Other people who were top mid laners and players themselves who have wide champion pools and can play a lot, they could see the value in it and they integrated it. So it showed that it wasn't just a cheesy one-off thing that only works in one game. And that's the key thing for me. Because the reason these picks work for Power of Evil, unlike Keane, is that he has comfort on them. He has vast experience on these picks. So he can play them when they're not in the meta because he understands how to still make them have some sort of a value in the game or bring a strength. He can play them against seemingly anyone. It's not a specific opponent or specific champion. He can play them into many different matchups, into many different levels of opponent as well, and gain edges or surprisingly in a matchup that's supposed to lose in CS, like go even sometimes. He would have builds and stylistic concepts around that specific champion or pick, which would mean it would work in otherwise losing lanes or bad situations or get through a portion in the game that champion everyone else does. It falls off at this point, but his build would actually sustain it through that to a point where suddenly it becomes super OP because he could survive with it where other people couldn't. Now, listen, a big part of why Power of Evil could do that and why Keane couldn't is because Power of Evil is a much better player than Keane and has borne it out throughout his career and all the different teams he's played on. But I think crucially, that shows in how they use these specific strengths. Because when someone like Power of Evil does this, he also brings in extra components, like you have to sometimes bring an extra target ban for him. That might leave your particular set of pool, so you've got now another strong meta champion open for a flex. Now the top laner, if he's a carry top laner, can play a particular champion that otherwise he might not have had available because that would have been within the 5 bans. That's why for me, these players should not be thought of as similar. They're not doing the same thing. The concept is not the same. And crucially, whereas you could absolutely criticize Keane for when it doesn't work and when he pushed it too far, criticizing Power of Evil in this scenario, I actually think is flawed thinking from the analyst and from people like that. I think if you've seen players like Froggen have been in similar situations they are right now, where they play things that aren't very meta, but they're fantastic on them. They can position on them. They can win out this matchup. They can CS in a matchup other people can't. They have the build that they know what they're doing and where they want to get to in the game. And they can be very good players and they can win you the game, even though that pick does not fit into a global meta. Other people do not agree with it and will not, quite frankly, be replicated all around the world. This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, NateDOhDoubleG, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Dean Tanglis, Wendelful, Blunt Smoking Anus Destroyer, Daniel Olivar, Chi Mao, JDubs, Kolja G, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, and a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion and weixz. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Perhaps you'd like to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA. Do you want teasers or who the guests are for my upcoming videos? Maybe you want to take part in a monthly donate a discussion with me. Well, all of these perks and more are available at the Patreon link in the description box below.